Kia ora koutou. My name is Brodie and I'm a data analyst for Tāmaki Paenga Hira, the Auckland Museum. I care for and maintain our online collections data, which basically means any of our data that will be viewed online. Wikipedia is a vital part of this online offering for us, along with its underlying data repository, Wikidata. But this story doesn't actually start with Wikipedia. And it doesn't even start with the internet. It starts with a librarian in Levin collecting newspaper clippings. We are in a special space today because I don't actually need to preface any of this discussion with the importance of the oft overlooked and misunderstood world of archival science, librarians and information professionals. I expect in many sections of this talk that I'll be probably singing to the choir, or in this case, singing to the nerds. But to the uninitiated, images might come to mind of dusty shelves, neglected filofaxes, and boxes of forgotten tape cartridges. However, I believe that archiving can in fact be a powerful political act. In fact, I posit that it can be joyful, optimistic, radical, and it can even be feminist. The practice of archiving stories regarding women in media goes back to the 19th century. The purpose driving the study and creation of women's archives is myriad. These collections were created to promote gender equality, to catalogue journalistic efforts to effectively write women into history, and are important also to give women's histories a room of one's own in archival spaces that have historically neglected women's stories. Here we have correspondence and papers regarding the Women's Archive. And here we have Enid Evans. In 1955, Levin librarian Enid Roberts, along with her friend Betty Holt, began to collect and supply material on the status and way of life of New Zealand women. The newspaper clippings and carefully curated magazine articles soon grew into a collection that was large enough to need more hands to care for it. In enters Enid Evans, Chief Librarian at Auckland Museum. Enid acquired this collection, seeing the value in preserving women's stories at a time when other research and archival institutions did not. Nearly 8,000 articles and short biographies were amassed over the 30 years it was active, with a crowdsourced curation strategy based on the submission of articles from the public, alongside weekly sorting and archival maintenance each Tuesday by the Women's Archive Committee. It is important to keep in mind, all of this painstaking work was carried out without any real certainty that the efforts were going to pan out. Sorting, storing, cataloguing once a week, combing through submissions by the public, in addition to their own individual research. It was an endeavour so optimistic, it was quite frankly a bit mad. This was at a time before data as we know it. There were no knowledge maps, no search queries, no triple stores, no World Wide Web, just literal hope guiding their fingertips to capture notable women in a time where gender precluded them from entering the history books. A privilege of having a library within a museum is the wonders of provenance. We're lucky to have documentation regarding the formation of the Women's Archive, along with ephemera capturing the mood of the endeavour at the time it was being undertaken. To the left are letters from Enid Evans to Enid Roberts as they strategised the establishment of the Women's Archive Committee, and to the right is a newspaper clipping from the very beginning. All in all, very cool. Now, just to clarify, the notable women who were included in the archive were fairly diverse. They were incredible women, brave women, sometimes quite frankly, strange women, some criminal women, career women, charitable women. It was a big mix. Some highlights include Kay Cassidy, the first Māori woman to obtain a private pilot's licence. Her licence was awarded in 1955 while she was a member of the Hawera Aero Club. She did, however, quit flying after getting married, and she settled right here down in Wellington. There was also Helena Marion Barnard, known as the Ginger Nut Lady. She contributed to the war effort during World War I and II by baking ginger nut biscuits to send to servicemen overseas, and it made the papers. Bless her. There was also Minnie Dean, the notorious baby killer in Southland, who tried unsuccessfully to take out life insurance policies on infants that she would adopt and then later murder. She is the only woman to be hanged for murder in New Zealand. But on the flip side, there's also Helena Garrett, the first woman juror in a criminal case in New Zealand. She was also the first woman jury foreman and an avid campaigner for more women to volunteer for jury service. The leap of faith all the women involved with this archive committee had to take, hoping that the culmination of their considerable efforts would have some impact in the future, is pretty moving to say the least, and I jumped at the chance to bring this collection to Wikidata when the opportunity arose courtesy of the Wikimedia Australia Wikidata Fellowship. The inherently political nature of an archive is best captured by this description from Freeland and von Holdenberg, stating, "The archive is not only a physical space where records are collected, cared for, labelled, ordered, and sometimes discarded. It is also a conceptual realm of narrative, memory, and memorialisation. To archive items means taking part in a process of shaping and evidencing histories that are entwined in epistemic hierarchies of power. The conceptual realms of narrative, memory, and memorialisation mentioned are not isolated to merely the physical bodies of the archives. There's been a renewed push to enhance the profile and visibility of women in history, but this time to extend efforts into digital landscapes. And herein lies the opportunity to do so on the back of a very well-developed and very high-traffic history-keeping platform such as Wikipedia, along with its underlying data repository, Wikidata. And thus, the mission of feminism in the archive becomes the mission of feminism in the database. But things are never that straightforward, are they? To begin with, Wikipedia can be a very masculine place. Julia B. Baer and Benjamin Collier approached this topic far more eloquently than I could ever. They paint a picture of the, at times, brutal warring and infighting that takes place in the digital battlefield that Wikipedia can be, stating, "The process of improving Wikipedia is widely called contributing. Often the contribution involves deleting or modifying another editor's work, as opposed to creating new content. Similarly, the term collaboration is typically used when describing Wikipedia. More often, the collaboration process is not synchronous collaboration with others on a personal basis. Rather, the process entails asynchronous writing and editing of articles. A large part of the contributing then is one person editing the work of unknown others and then competing for one's words to prevail. It basically sounds like the most pain in the ass, petty group project dynamic I've ever heard of. One commenter claimed in the press that rather than collaborating around the construction of knowledge, talk pages are full of descriptions of edit warring, where successive editors have tried to cancel each other's contributions out and engage in bitter, contentious arguments about the accuracy of conflicting points of view. Doesn't this sound like a fun, relaxing, voluntary activity to take up your Sunday afternoons? Overall, I'm not overly surprised that a website put together by male data nerds and computer scientists, not exactly budding candidates to be polite and affable social bunnies, became a hostile place. But I'm also not overly surprised that there hasn't been mass appeal for women to join in on the bloodbath. I don't balk too easily, but my first edit was pretty nerve-wracking, and hilariously enough was deleted within 10 minutes of me making it. At first I was outraged and filled with a righteous fury. However, upon further investigation, my edits were actually deleted by a helpful bot. So free tip, it's worth checking it's a person, not a program that has wronged you before becoming impassioned with feminist rage. There is a big gender gap on Wikipedia and Wikidata. Less than 25% of all articles and Wikidata items that represent people are about women. Research has been undertaken to confirm the source of this bias. If lack of representation is a symptom, the cause can have many underlying comorbidities, all of which require different remedies. In the research paper Quantifying the Gap, a case study of Wikidata gender disparities, these potential underlying factors are split up into actions of Wikidata editors, or from external factors, or a combination of the two. Maybe Wikidata editors add proportionally more items about men than women. Maybe these editors tend to favour the kind of content that's mainly applicable to men's dominance in that field. For example, particular sports. Maybe more editors themselves are in fact men, and spoiler alert, it's true. There are 85% of the Wikipedia editor population in most recent surveys is shown to be made up of men. And as most Wikimedians will know, you can't just put anybody on Wikipedia. There are prerequisites in place to curate the data that's available. Notability is one of the more critical prerequisites for the creation of articles in Wikipedia. Requiring evidence from a secondary source to meet this requirement and prove significant coverage of the person and/or topic. Unfortunately, this requirement is dependent on media coverage in times of political bias, ignorance, oppression, posing difficulties for the inclusion of historical women figures along with people of colour. This also poses difficulties for including stories that aren't written down but are cared for in oral histories and testimonies, an exclusion that continues to hurt the coverage of our Māori and Pacific communities, who have cultural norms steeped in oral tradition, along with many more Indigenous populations around the world. As newspaper clippings more than suffice as a secondary source, I'm lucky in that the woman behind the Women's Archive unwittingly created for me a data goldmine. Although these librarians had no idea at the time what Wikipedia or Wikidata would be, their efforts have ensured that those women's names would eventually be able to be recorded in no less than the largest encyclopedia in the world. So what does it look like to transform an archive that then became a spreadsheet, but without any standardization of values or particularly intensive data cleaning, along with the liberal use of every data analyst's most feared space in the database, free text fields? I'm envisioning that where I started is most likely where most of you listening will be, or maybe a few steps further back, depending on your team's capacity. In an industry so dependent on volunteers due to limited resource, and short of skilled professionals due to limited resource, there seems to be an understanding in which many of us are in the same position. There is a shelf, or maybe a room, perhaps even a whole floor of items so deep in the backlog that even after acquisition, a session into the collection is a long way away, let alone cataloguing and digitising. I can't offer any miracle solutions to solve the capacity issue, but I can hope that maybe this presentation will provide incentive to begin the process of documenting your forgotten treasures and stewarding the invisible so that your data can be as useful and as transformative as the creativity and capability of the user who stumbles upon it in the future. As an aside, presently only half of our Women's Archive has in fact been catalogued. It's my hope that projects utilising data like this can act as a sort of proof of concept, encouraging the ongoing investment of time and resource to ephemera in the backlog like this. It's exciting to ponder what gems are still sitting in our Women's Archive, currently undiscovered and lying in wait for an opportunity to shine. Over here we have an example of a very exciting entry in our archive, someone that you may already recognise, the indomitable force that was Joan Whiffen, the dinosaur lady. This is what our secondary source looks like, a selection of the newspaper articles in her file. The secret nobody tells you about working in GLAM is that you will, whether you like it or not, be working with a lot of spreadsheets. I have seen co-workers try and escape Excel's clutches, but it is inevitable. History is data. Objects are data. Stories are data, and all of this data invokes a duty of care from us as its custodians. It may not feel like it in the moment, but it really is a great privilege to be ripping our collective hair out over formulas and conditional formatting. There is something mystical in the management of data of historical figures. Our subjects are often no longer living and unable to advocate for themselves. It makes their stories all the more vulnerable and worthy of our attention and safekeeping. It may be overly sentimental of me, but it's something I like to keep in mind when in the muck and mire of data cleaning. An important aspect of data cleaning for eventual use on Wikidata is that you need to have an understanding of the data structure of statements, properties, and identifiers. Free text is appropriate in the initial description of the data item, but everything else needs to be a standardized, semantically appropriate data value. A good way to ensure you're using the right values is to set up a template to bolster consistency in the way that your data is structured. These templates are publicly available within the Wiki ecosystem, so we can all have a nosy at what each other is doing. But this takes time, trial and error, and often reviewing what other people have done. Even though Wikidata is a database of collective contributions, there is an understanding that we want it to look uniform and free from widely varying interpretations of how data should be presented. This is easier said than done, and as you know, data will always hold a shadow of bias, in the way that there will always be a shadow of bias within the hands of the person who extracted, transformed, and loaded that data initially. A final caution on this kind of data work I might have to offer is that it can be frustrating working with untraditional data items in a traditional data structure. Property values such as employment can often fail to capture the nuance of a woman's existence in this time period, as wife of a minister isn't exactly a preset data value, even if that role was most likely far more demanding than many employment titles could ever encompass. Modern metadata standards require us to fit square pegs in round holes. It often feels awkward and clunky, and it can be a great worry that you're doing your subject a disservice with the way you capture their life in a few statements on a page. There's no easy solution for this, but in my experience, perfect can be the enemy of good. Some visibility is better than none, and as infrastructure develops and improves, we can continue to shape the data in a direction that's reflective of the incredibly lush and vibrant lives that our women in our archive have led. Further down, after statements, comes my favourite part, identifiers. These are what makes Wikidata so potent, and it's all due to the practice of data round-tripping, essentially cycling data as a shared resource, proliferated from around the World Wide Web, with data rapidly moving from one place to another, exports, imports, open access downloads, real-time ingest across linked open data platforms. Data here isn't sitting in an archive unused. It is being published everywhere and all at once. The info box to the right of a Wikipedia page is a good example of Wikidata in action. Here you see the statements and their property values. And actually, if you were to do a Google search, you'll see the same data populating an info box within your Google search platform. In fact, many websites beyond just Google are built using Wikidata. Bionomia, Scholia, Histopedia, even natural language processors like Platypus. The dividends of putting your data out there are instant and wide in reach. In our own utilisation of the Wikimedia Foundation platform, we had a total of 75 million views last year of our data. And that's just within the wiki landscape, not even counting aggregator websites that pull data from there. There's something incredibly gratifying about those numbers, particularly from our industry. It can be discouraging, interrogating too closely the question of why we are doing all this. It is so much time, it's so much work, and it's so much effort. And just like Enid Roberts and Enid Evans, we often don't know how and if those efforts will materialise in the public consciousness. With Wikidata and Wikipedia, we're going straight to the source. We are ensuring the illumination of our darkest archives, and we're carving out a space for the underrepresented and excluded to finally take their place on the pages of history. I understand that this was pretty information dense and probably more conceptual than capability focused. So if you are interested in exploring where to get started with Wikidata with your collections, please see the slide for resources to begin your learning journey. And ngā mihi nui, thank you so much for listening to my talk.
Any questions from the floor? We've got about 5 minutes.
Hey, everyone. Kia ora. Thanks very much for that talk. How many new person records did you end up adding to Wikidata as a result?
I'm just going to repeat the question. So you asked how many new person records I added as a result. So I was working just with the data on Wikidata, so that didn't include the Wikipedia pages. All in all, it's a project still in progress. I don't have the number, but yeah, it was slower going than I thought it would be. I thought I could upload a giant batch and be away laughing and it would be done in a week. But most of the work wasn't actually in the uploading, it was in setting the groundwork with the templates and researching all of the data properties that you're meant to be using. So that is where the work lies mostly.
Fantastic, great.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe mō tō whakaro e mihana kia koe mō tō mahi in this kaupapa as well. Just wanted to thank you for your kōrero and your work to date in this space. It's beautiful. I just had a question around like the open access whakaro. If and when it comes to Māori and Indigenous data and digital sovereignty, if and when you get to the kōrero tuku iho and mātauranga of Māori and other Indigenous wahine in Aotearoa in this context, are there any system structures in place to kind of address the differences in how, or an Indigenous perspective of what open access looks like and the purpose of it?
Absolutely. I will. I will. So the question was about open access and ensuring the mana and dignity of Māori in that space as we try and put them on the internet. So at Auckland Museum, we're really lucky to have quite a rigorous cultural permissions policy. For the most part, it does pertain to images with the way that people are depicted and also with objects. So we didn't quite run into these issues with the data because it was mainly with names and then short biographical histories along with marriages. So it was more genealogical in nature. But my dream is to extend this beyond into a Wikimedia Commons project, which would also include photos if possible. And if that was the case, we would run it through our cultural permissions policy. And the goal of making things accessible on the internet should never be undermining the dignity of Indigenous peoples. So there's always that consideration, and it's never a conflict because that is just the way that it has to be, and that's how we can actually care for our data is by protecting it. Kia ora.
Thanks so much, Brodie. Just everyone, thank Brodie once more.